A child's crutch was thrown off a plane. No warning, no apology, just silent cruelty, masked as protocol. But what if the boy wasn't who they thought he was? What if his father wasn't just another man in line, but a man who had once trained the very agencies now scrambling for control? What happens when a flight crew pushes too far and learns too late who they're flying with? This is not just a story about a disabled black child being humiliated on an airplane. It's about the system that let it happen, the silence that followed, and the father who refused to let his son be treated as invisible. Why did the gate agent disappear moments before boarding? Who tampered with the manifest? And how could one boy's quiet resistance trigger a nationwide reckoning? Get ready to witness a story of pain, power, and redemption, set 38,000 feet in the air, where dignity was tested and justice took flight. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now let's begin. Flight attendant. Threw a black kid's crutches off the plane. Didn't know who he was. Flying with the soft tap of carbon fiber crutches echoed down the polished marble floor of Eastbridge International Airport's Terminal C. It was still early, the kind of quiet morning that carried the sound of footsteps just a little longer than usual. Rolling suitcases hummed over the tiles. Boarding announcements whispered through overhead speakers. And among the quiet shuffle of travelers, one boy moved with quiet determination. Zion Miles, 13, leaned gently into his left crutch. His right leg, slightly weakened by cerebral palsy, dragged in half steps behind him, not with struggle, but with practiced rhythm. His movements were not fast, but they were sure. Every step was deliberate, like the beat of a song only he could hear. His crutches were matte black, sleek and modern, glinting faintly under the terminal lights. They had been a gift from his father. Behind him walked Dr. Tobias Miles, tall, composed, and always watching. His long wool coat moved as he did, precise and unhurried. Tobias had the kind of presence that made people step aside without knowing why. Not forceful, just grounded. His eyes never left Zion, but he didn't reach to adjust the boy's backpack or offer to carry anything. That was their silent agreement. Zion wanted independence, and Tobias honored it. They passed a row of digital kiosks and a coffee stand where steam curled upward into warm lights. Zion's eyes flicked toward the pastries behind the glass, but he kept walking. There was something about flying that always made him feel nervous and excited at the same time. The wide windows near Gate C7 revealed the silhouette of their aircraft outside, nose gleaming in the winter sunlight, silver and blue, with the faint outline of the Crestline Airlines logo on the tail. "You're walking a little faster today," Tobias said quietly, catching up beside him. Zion smiled without turning. "I want the window seat." Tobias nodded, noted. Left side, row 4. They paused near the gate, where a few passengers had already begun to gather. A businessman in a checkered scarf scrolled his phone. A young couple whispered over a stroller. And at the far side, a tall flight attendant in a fitted uniform glanced briefly in their direction, then looked away. Zion sat down carefully on a bench and exhaled. The weight of his backpack pulled slightly on one shoulder, and he adjusted it before setting it at his feet. Tobias sat next to him, silent. Their moments didn't need to be filled with talk. They were used to stillness. And besides, Zion was saving his breath. The long walk had taken more out of him than he let on. "You good, Tobias?" asked after a few beats. Zion nodded. "Just resting." Across from them, a little boy stared openly at Zion's crutches. His mother pulled him gently closer and whispered something into his ear. Zion noticed but didn't react. He was used to stares, used to being the object of quiet explanations and loud assumptions. Once, in 3rd grade, a substitute teacher had told him, "You're such an inspiration, just for getting to class on time." Zion had smiled then too, even though the words landed heavy. He had learned not to let strangers define his day. Tobias leaned forward slightly and rested his elbows on his knees. His coat opened at the chest, revealing a pressed navy suit beneath it. His hands, still and controlled, rested lightly together. He looked like someone who could be a professor or a lawyer, or maybe something in between. No one knew that once, years ago. He had done work that didn't involve books or courtrooms, work that had required silence, precision, and reading people faster than they could read him. Zion didn't know everything about his father's past, but he knew enough to trust the calm behind his words. A quiet announcement came through the speaker. Flight 627 to Bella Maris, now boarding Group A. They weren't Group A. They had Group C printed in simple black ink on their boarding passes. But Tobias preferred arriving early. Better to watch than to rush. He always said, Zion used to think it was just about flights. Now, he understood it applied to almost everything. The tall flight attendant reappeared, stepping out from the jet bridge. His name tag read Kyle. His hair was neat, his shoes were polished, but something about the way he looked at passengers as they approached felt rehearsed. His smile came and went like emotion learned, not felt. When he spotted Zion again, his expression flattened ever so slightly. Then he turned and disappeared back into the aircraft. Zion noticed. Tobias did too. Neither said anything. Gate C7's boarding call rolled forward. Group B was announced. The line moved slowly. When their group was finally called, Zion rose first. He adjusted his crutches, checked the Velcro on his sneakers, and moved into the line. Tobias followed behind. A gate agent smiled at them. "Welcome aboard." Zion nodded politely and moved into the jet bridge. The floor changed beneath his feet, from tile to carpet. The air turned cooler, more contained. The aircraft door waited ahead, open like the entrance to something unknown and important. Tobias took a long breath. He had learned over the years to watch for certain signs. The way a person's voice changed when talking to someone disabled. The flicker in an attendant's face when forced politeness turned into thinly veiled annoyance. He didn't want to need those instincts today. But something about Kyle Denver's expression had raised a thread of memory inside him. Not fear, just alertness. Zion stepped into the aircraft, one crutch clicking gently against the floor, his eyes lighting up at the rows ahead. "Window seat," he whispered, with a grin. Tobias smiled behind him. "Claim it. Sun." The cabin air felt cooler than Zion expected. He paused just inside the aircraft, letting his eyes adjust to the narrow aisle and the soft overhead lights. His crutches clicked against the low-pile carpet as he moved forward, counting rows quietly under his breath. Row 4, left window. That was his target. Kyle Denver stood just beside the galley, half blocking the aisle, with one arm resting along the jump seat frame. He looked up from a checklist as the boy entered and immediately straightened. "You can't bring those all the way to your seat," Kyle said, gesturing toward Zion's crutches without even saying hello. Zion blinked. "They go under the seat. They're part of my mobility aid." Kyle's smile was tight, perfunctory. "That's not regulation. I'll store them for you. We'll bring them back after landing." Zion hesitated. Behind him, Tobias was just stepping onto the aircraft. Kyle extended his hand impatiently. "I'll take them now." Zion's fingers gripped the handles of his crutches a little tighter. I need them to get to my seat. Kyle's brow twitched, ever so slightly. That's what I'm here for, he said with an edge of finality. Before Zion could reply, Tobias placed a calm hand on his son's shoulder. His tone was low, steady. We'll get to our seats, and then you can collect them if you need. Kyle opened his mouth, but something in Tobias's voice, or perhaps the way he stood relaxed, yet undeniably present, gave him pause. He stepped back half an inch. Zion exhaled and continued down the aisle, each step supported, deliberate, balanced by years of practice. Passengers in nearby rows looked up, some out of curiosity, others with that uncomfortable glance reserved for people who walk differently. No one said anything. Row 4. Zion turned in. The window seat was empty, clean, soft light from the tarmac stretching across the cushion. He turned carefully, backing toward it with quiet focus. His right leg needed a bit more effort to tuck under the armrest. Tobias helped steady the backpack before sliding into the aisle seat beside him. Kyle lingered just behind them. His eyes flicked to the crutches still in Zion's grip. Sir, he said pointedly to Tobias, for takeoff, those items need to be placed in a secure compartment. Tobias turned his head slightly, not enough to face him, but enough to acknowledge. His voice was calm, measured. We understand regulations, but these are not optional items. They are necessary supports, and we know where they fit. Kyle inhaled slowly, the way people do when they're used to winning small battles over people who can't push back. But Tobias didn't give him the satisfaction of a longer argument. He leaned into his seat, one hand resting gently over Zion's arm. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman glanced over from her seat and offered a small, sympathetic smile. Zion nodded, but didn't return it. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He just wanted the flight to begin, to rise, to feel the quiet rumble under his feet and pretend he was like everyone else. Kyle walked back toward the front galley without another word, his footsteps clipped and sharp. Why do people always look like they're helping when they're not? Zion whispered. Tobias gave a slight smile, because it lets them feel powerful without saying they're in control. The boarding continued. Passengers shuffled in. Overhead bins clicked shut. Small bags slid under seats. The familiar pre-flight rituals unfolded in motion around them. A father helped his toddler settle in with juice. A man grumbled about leg room. 2 teenagers laughed over a shared screen. But Zion's world had already narrowed. The stiffness in Kyle's tone. The look in his eyes. It clung to him like an itch under the skin. Do you think he's going to do something? Zion asked quietly. Tobias didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed forward, not on Kyle, but on the cabin as a whole. The structure of movement. The signals. He already did, he said finally. He made you feel like a problem before you even sat down. The door closed. The click of the seal echoed faintly through the cabin. Kyle returned to the aisle with a different tone now, louder, performative. He smiled at passengers, joked with a man in row 6, handed a bottle of water to a woman 2 seats back. It was like flipping a switch. Tobias noticed. So did Zion. I hate this part, Zion whispered. What part? When someone's mean, but only in ways no one else will ever believe. Tobias looked at his son with quiet admiration. It took some people years to understand that. Zion had learned it before high school. Kyle approached again, this time with a garbage bag looped over one arm. He passed their row with a quick glance. Trash, he asked. Zion shook his head. Tobias said nothing. Kyle turned, paused. His eyes landed on the crutches leaning upright between the window and Zion's seat. He reached. It happened too fast. With one sharp pull, he yanked the left crutch out from between Zion's arm and the seat. The boy flinched, startled, half rising in instinct. "Hey." Tobias's voice broke the silence, but Kyle had already moved. With another swift motion, Kyle grabbed the second crutch from the floor and held both like a pair of ski poles. "I told you I'd store them," he said, not smiling now. "It's a safety issue." Zion looked stunned. His leg, unbraced now, twisted slightly as he tried to regain balance in his seat. Kyle turned without another word. Zion's voice was small, broken. "Dad." Tobias stood, calmly, slowly, not with rage, with control. His fingers curled once, then loosened. His voice was quiet, but clear. "Return those now." Kyle kept walking toward the galley. The aisle was still. Zion's breathing grew unsteady. One by one, passengers turned to watch. The woman across the aisle placed her hand over her mouth. Kyle reached the galley, then, in one motion so clean, it felt choreographed. He pushed open the cabin door to the jet bridge and flung the crutches outward. They clattered down the metal ramp and out of sight. Gasps. One, then another. A man in row 5 sat upright. A girl in row 7 covered her mouth. Zion tried to stand. His foot slipped. There was a soft thud, then the sharp cry of pain. His knee buckled. He went down. The narrow cabin made the sound louder than it should have been. It echoed. Tobias dropped beside him instantly, arms around his son before his body even hit the floor. "Zion," he whispered. "Stay still." The boy's face twisted, his jaw clenched. He tried not to scream, but the sound escaped anyway, low and raw. Kyle didn't turn around. Passengers sat frozen. No one moved. Not yet. Tobias looked down at his son's leg. It was swelling, not broken, not yet, but the impact had wrenched something out of place. He looked up, eyes burning, not with anger, but something colder, purpose. Then, with a steady breath, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed his phone. He opened the camera. Click. Zion on the floor. Click. The open door. The stunned passengers. Click. The space where the crutches had been. Then he dialed a number, a secure one. "This is Dr. Tobias Miles," he said quietly. "Gate C7. We've got a breach. Begin documentation and initiate freeze. Do not let this flight leave." He hung up, and for the first time, looked Kyle directly in the eyes. Kyle paused, only for a second, but it was enough. For a few seconds after the crutches disappeared down the jet bridge, the cabin of Flight 627 was wrapped in a fragile silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The soft hum of the plane's ventilation system was the only sound in the stillness. And at the center of it all, Zion lay on the cabin floor, curled slightly around his injured leg, his face tense with pain. Tobias crouched beside him, steadying the boy's shoulders with both hands. He didn't ask if he was all right. He could see the answer written in Zion's clenched jaw and trembling hands. The moment demanded action, not comfort. "Deep breath," Tobias whispered, brushing the boy's hair back gently. "You're all right. Just breathe." Zion tried. He pulled in a shaky breath, held it for 2 seconds, and exhaled with a grunt of discomfort. Behind them, Kyle Denver stood at the galley entrance, arms folded, expression unreadable. He didn't return to the aisle. He didn't offer help. He simply watched. Across the cabin, passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A man in the middle seat of row 5 slowly reached up and removed his headphones. The older woman across the aisle from Zion was already fumbling with her phone. Her hands were shaking as she tapped the camera icon. Another voice spoke up, uncertain and tentative. Did he just throw that boy's crutches off the plane? The question hung in the air like a dropped suitcase, heavy, unwelcome. Tobias rose slowly. His back straightened inch by inch until he stood at his full height in the narrow aisle. The coat he wore shifted with him, folding along the lines of his posture like fabric obeying discipline. "Does anyone have a blanket?" he asked calmly. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried. A younger man in row 3 opened an overhead bin and passed one down without a word. Tobias knelt again and placed it under Zion's leg as gently as if it were glass. The boy's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He hadn't cried since he was 9, not in public. Tobias turned again and looked toward the cockpit. The curtain was still drawn. No one had emerged. "Kyle," he said, no louder than before, "I asked you to return those mobility aids. Now you've endangered a passenger and created a medical issue." Kyle didn't answer. Tobias took a step forward. "Open the cabin door, now." Kyle raised his chin. "You don't give orders here." Tobias's stare didn't shift. "Neither do you anymore." A quiet murmur rose from the passengers. Some began recording. One woman whispered something to her seatmate, who nodded and tapped out a message on his phone. Just then, a figure appeared from the front. Not the pilot, but a man in a charcoal gray suit stepping out of first class. He looked to be in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair, a subtle scar beneath his jawline, and the kind of calm posture that suggested former military or federal work. He said nothing, merely observed. Elliot Rhodes. His eyes swept from Tobias to Zion on the floor, then to Kyle, who now shifted uncomfortably. Tobias didn't acknowledge Elliot, but he knew he was there. The situation had become too visible to ignore. Kyle stepped forward, face tense. "Look, I was following protocol. The crutches were a hazard. I warned them. The boy resisted. He's not hurt. He can sit. I'll file a report." "You'll do no such thing," said Tobias, his voice now lower and firmer. "What you did was deliberate. You violated federal accessibility law. You created an unsafe flight environment. And you assaulted my son by removing his only method of mobility without consent or cause." Kyle rolled his eyes and took a half step forward. "What are you, a lawyer?" "No," Tobias said. "Worse." The front of the cabin stirred. A voice crackled through a discreet intercom near the galley. "This is Captain Morales. We've received an urgent hold order from ground operations. All boarding is suspended. Please remain seated." Kyle froze. Tobias reached into his coat once more and pulled out a slim black ID wallet. He flipped it open and held it up, just high enough for Kyle and the passengers nearby to see. Inside was a badge. Not airline security, not local law enforcement. Federal Aviation Operations Command, Oversight Division. There was a silence in the air now that felt different, not fragile, charged. The older man from first class Elliot finally stepped closer, leaned in toward Tobias, and said with quiet amusement, "Always knew you'd show up where the cracks were loudest." Tobias didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at Zion again. "You're all right," he said. "We've got eyes now." Zion blinked slowly. "Why does it feel like this happens a lot more than it should?" Tobias nodded. "Because it does." Across the cabin, someone began clapping, then someone else. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. The kind of clap that starts when people feel something has turned, even if they don't understand how or why. Kyle turned red. He stepped back toward the cockpit curtain and vanished through it, his shoulders tight with barely contained fury. Elliot crouched beside Zion. "Hey, kid." "I'm Elliot." Zion nodded, eyes still fogged. "You did good. You stayed strong." Zion exhaled. "My leg hurts." "I know. Help's coming." In the distance, through the window at row 4. The lights of a ground ambulance began to flash along the service road. Back near the gate, supervisors were already assembling. The flight delay was now labeled an emergency stop. Airport security was walking toward the aircraft. Tobias didn't move. He stood still at his son's side, one hand gently resting over Zion's. The worst part of moments like this was how they never announced themselves as history. They began as a simple cruelty, one person forgetting another's humanity, one man choosing control over compassion, and then they unravel, until the world has no choice but to watch. Outside, the crutches lay where they had landed, bent, scratched. One of the handles was cracked, the material dented from the fall. A baggage handler picked them up, confused, holding them like something sacred and broken at the same time. Tobias looked up as a uniformed paramedic entered the plane. "We'll take it from here," the woman said gently, kneeling beside Zion. Tobias nodded once, stepping aside but not far. As they lifted Zion onto a small wheelchair, the passengers parted. No one looked away now. Some clapped again, quieter. Others filmed. And one boy, holding in his tears, sat up straighter in his seat, refusing to let pain own the moment. As they reached the cabin door, Tobias paused. He looked back at the rows, the silence, the watchers. Then he followed his son down the jet bridge, leaving Kyle, the broken crutches, and the lie of professionalism behind them. This wasn't the end. It was only the first consequence. When the cabin door closed behind Dr. Tobias Miles and his son, the atmosphere inside Flight 627 did not return to normal. It couldn't. The calm the passengers usually expected before takeoff had been fractured, replaced by a quiet tension that settled over every seat like a heavy coat no one wanted to wear. Elliot Rhodes stood near row 4, arms folded, leaning subtly against the bulkhead. He didn't speak. He didn't move toward the front where the curtains separated business from the flight crew. He simply watched. Behind him, a woman was still recording, her phone angled just above her tray table. Across the aisle, a father murmured to his daughter, trying to explain something he himself didn't quite understand. In row 7, a teenage boy opened a group text and typed in all caps, "You won't believe what just happened." And up front, behind the closed curtain, Kyle Denver was pacing. The walls of the galley seemed tighter now. He had one hand braced against the side panel, the other running through his hair. His heartbeat was loud in his own ears, louder than the ventilation, louder than the buzzing of his intercom headset. He had made a mistake, or maybe not a mistake, but an overstep. An action that would have gone unnoticed on another day, in another city, with a different family. But this time, he had chosen the wrong kid, and worse, the wrong father. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. But before he could gather his next move, the intercom clicked on. "Kyle, please report to the cockpit." The voice was Captain Morales, calm but clipped, neutral but not casual. Kyle wiped his palms on his pants and stepped through the side entrance to the flight deck. The cockpit was quiet. Both pilots sat in place, but neither was adjusting switches. The checklist had been paused. The co-pilot, a younger man named Daniels, barely glanced at Kyle. Captain Morales, however, looked directly at him. "Close the door, please." Kyle obeyed. There was a moment of silence. Then Morales spoke. Is there something you want to tell us before airport operations reach us directly? Kyle straightened his shoulders. I followed protocol. The passenger refused to store unauthorized equipment. I removed it. It became a safety issue. End of story. Morales didn't blink. That's not what half the cabin just saw. I don't control their perception, Kyle said, crossing his arms. No, you controlled your actions, Morales replied. And now this flight is grounded, and we're all under a spotlight. There was a beat of stillness. Then Morales added, that boy was injured, medical is involved, and we've just received a formal complaint filed directly with federal oversight. Kyle's stomach dropped. We're waiting for operations and security to board. Morales continued, until then, you'll stay in this cockpit. I don't want you in the cabin right now. We need to contain this. Contain, Kyle repeated, bitterly. Like a leak, Morales looked him square in the eyes. Exactly like that. Back in the main cabin, Elliot finally took a seat in the aisle of row 5. He tapped a quiet message into his phone, the screen light reflecting briefly in his calm eyes. The message went to someone outside the airport. Someone who needed to know the timeline before the headlines twisted it. He glanced behind him. The young woman from row 6 was now speaking to a gate agent who had come aboard. Her voice was low, but insistent. She had seen everything. She had video. She had notes. She had names. The agent nodded, scribbled something onto a small notepad, and moved on. Passengers were no longer passive. They had become witnesses. Elliot folded his hands and waited. Across the country, in a sleek corner office 5 states away. Cheryl Maddox's phone buzzed with an alert. CEO. Crestline Airlines. PR escalation. Tag flight. 627. Incident federal intervention. Passenger injury. ADA violation. Severity critical media risk imminent. She stared at the screen for 2 seconds before she tapped her intercom. Get me direct contact with ground operations at Eastbridge. Right now. She didn't yell. Cheryl Maddox never yelled, but everyone moved when she spoke. That was her reputation. A steel spine and a silk jacket. And today, that steel was about to be tested. Back on the aircraft, the air was starting to feel stale. Not from lack of ventilation, but from emotional fatigue. People were drained. The pause between incident and resolution was always the longest. Everyone wanted something to happen. An announcement, a decision, a signal. Elliot finally stood and moved toward the galley. He opened the curtain without asking. The gate agent, still present, looked up in surprise. Sir, I'll have to ask you to. Elliot held up a wallet with the flash of an insignia. Not a badge, but something equally weighty. I need to speak with the lead crew member. He's in the cockpit. Correct, yes. But let the captain know Elliot Rhodes is requesting a debrief. He'll understand. The agent hesitated, then nodded and tapped his radio. Seconds later, the cockpit door opened slightly, and Captain Morales emerged. Elliot stepped aside and gestured for a private word. Morales leaned in. I need a read on the internal report, Elliot said. You have less than 5 minutes before this escalates beyond your hands. Morales nodded once, short and slow. Then he glanced back at the cockpit and signaled for Daniels to hold position. They stepped aside into the galley. The passenger was Dr. Tobias Miles. Correct, Morales asked. Correct. He flashed federal credentials and activated a priority freeze through ground command. We've never had a freeze override from a passenger before. He's not just a passenger, Elliot said. He's part of the Oversight Division. Former Tier 6 clearance. That order you received didn't come from a call center. It came from the Internal Integrity Board. Morales exhaled. And his son, Zion Miles, 13, disabled, assaulted by your lead attendant. Witnesses have footage. One crutch broken, the other bent. Medical team already assessed blunt trauma to the knee. And Kyle, he's in there, refusing accountability, still believes policy will shield him. Morales didn't speak. His jaw tensed, then relaxed. I'll file the preliminary report and await next instructions. He said. No, Elliot said. You'll do more than that. You'll initiate an internal lockout. No one leaves this plane without an external escort. I've already notified legal control. This incident is about to go federal. Behind them. Another knock came at the cabin door. This time, it wasn't security. It was Nathan Bell, director of Eastbridge Airport Operations. He stepped on board with 3 uniformed agents behind him and a clipboard in his hand. He looked tired, focused, ready. Captain Morales, he said. Where is your lead flight attendant? Still in the cockpit. Bring him out. Kyle stepped out, his face pale but defiant. Nathan didn't waste time. Kyle Denver, effective immediately. You are suspended from active duty. You are to surrender your access badge and await formal investigation pending federal review. Your actions have triggered a multi-agency response. Kyle looked stunned. I didn't hurt anyone. I was following protocol. You removed a minor's only mobility aid without consent and caused physical harm. That is not protocol. That is negligence. Kyle's mouth opened, closed. Then Nathan said, You're lucky he didn't press criminal charges. Yet. The weight of that last word dropped like a hammer. Elliot watched from a few feet away. He took a breath. The tide was shifting, and still, the world had not yet learned who Zion really was. Tobias stood by the airport's private medical unit, watching as the nurse gently rewrapped Zion's swollen knee. The boy was trying to be brave, jaw set, eyes focused on the sterile ceiling tiles, counting each faint line where the panels met. He wouldn't look down. He didn't want Tobias to see the pain he was still carrying, not just from the fall, but from what it meant. Pain was pain. But this was different. This was being reminded that to some people, his presence was inconvenient, that his disability wasn't seen as part of him, but as a complication. I didn't cry, Zion said quietly. I know, Tobias replied. They looked at me like I caused it, like I made it happen. Tobias exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. He wasn't the kind of father who spoke just to fill silence. He let the weight of his son's words settle. They didn't see you. Z, he said at last. They saw a moment to control. Zion's fingers twisted a corner of the blanket. Was I wrong to not let go? No, Tobias said, without hesitation. You were right to hold on. They were wrong to try and take. Outside the door, footsteps approached. 2 sets, one light, one heavier. Tobias turned as Elliot Rhodes entered with Nathan Bell behind him. Both men nodded in silent greeting. Security has Kyle in temporary custody, Nathan said. He's not talking much, but we've impounded his crew tablet. Something doesn't feel right, because it isn't, Elliot said flatly. Tobias glanced at his son, then gestured toward the hallway. The 3 men stepped outside. Any leaks yet? Tobias asked. Nathan shook his head. We've contained the press, for now, but word's spreading internally. The CEO's been briefed. PR teams are scrambling. They're preparing for a full press response. Elliot looked over his shoulder. We need more than PR. I agree, Tobias said. His voice was low, but forceful. There's a pattern here. The crew wasn't just negligent. They were confident, too confident, as if they expected no resistance. Nathan frowned. Are you suggesting inside coordination? I'm not suggesting, Tobias replied. I'm confirming. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin tablet of his own, tapping it twice. He rotated the screen to show them. A list of crew members appeared, but beside Kyle Denver's name was a symbol, small, red, discreet, affiliation marker, unofficial, known associates of Victor Hale. Elliot leaned in, jaw tightening. Victor Hale, a name spoken like smoke behind closed doors, a man with no official title, no government file. Yet his influence threaded through parts of the transportation infrastructure, quietly placing individuals into small cracks where visibility was low. Gate control, crew rotation, logistics. Are you saying Kyle was planted? Nathan asked. Not planted, Tobias said. Activated? Elliot nodded. Then this wasn't just abuse of power. It was a trigger. Nathan rubbed his temples. My God! What were they trying to provoke? Before anyone could answer. Tobias's tablet pinged with a secure message. He opened it. The screen displayed a clipped image, grainy security footage from a corridor 3 gates down. It showed Kyle earlier that day, entering a restricted break room with a man whose face was mostly obscured. But Tobias didn't need the full view. The build, the posture, the gloved left hand. It was Victor Hale. He turned the screen so the others could see. That was 2 hours before the flight. Tobias said. Kyle was handed something. What Nathan asked? Tobias paused. Not sure yet, but I'm guessing it was a list. Or a name. Elliot exhaled through his teeth. Then we need to assume this wasn't about the crutches. It wasn't even about Zion. It was about you. Tobias's expression didn't change, but a cold awareness passed behind his eyes. If they were trying to flush me out, he said quietly. They succeeded. Nathan shifted, unsettled. What happens now? We isolate every crew member with past exposure to Hale, Tobias said. We scan flight logs for anomalies, and we prepare for media fallout, because once they realize who Zion is, this story changes. Elliot stepped closer, voice low. Are you ready for that? Tobias hesitated. I don't want my son to become a headline, he said, but I won't let him be erased either. Back inside the medical unit. Zion was adjusting his leg on the examination bed, alone for the first time in 10 minutes. He stared out the window toward the tarmac, where aircraft lights blinked like tired eyes. He didn't understand who Victor Hale was. He didn't know what agencies his father once worked for. But he understood the feeling of being watched. He felt it now, even behind the glass, as if somewhere in the airport someone was still tracking their every move. When Tobias returned to the room, Zion sat up. Are we going home? Soon, Tobias replied. But first, I need you to answer something. Honestly. Zion met his father's gaze. When you got on that plane, did you feel unsafe right away? Before Kyle said anything, Zion thought for a moment, then nodded. I didn't know why, he said, but it felt wrong, like the air didn't want me there. Tobias gave a faint smile. That's your instinct. Never lose that. A knock at the door broke the moment. It was Elliot. Sorry to interrupt, he said gently, but you both need to see this. He turned the tablet in his hand toward them. On screen was a breaking news banner. Airline incident sparks investigation, passenger with disability injured. During pre-flight conflict, federal oversight agent. Present on board, Zion's face was blurred in the photo. but the story had already left the airport. Tobias closed his eyes for half a second. "It started," he said. "Not by your hand," Elliot reminded him, "but by your presence." Zion leaned back, the blanket still draped over his legs. "They'll want to talk to me, won't they?" he asked. "Yes," Tobias said. Zion nodded once. "Then I'll talk, but only if I can say the truth." Tobias reached for his hand and gripped it gently. "That's all we ever ask." Outside, the corridor buzzed with quiet tension. Security agents, airport managers, and airline staff moved with restrained urgency. Something bigger had been set in motion, and it was no longer about one flight. It was about who had been allowed to operate behind the curtain for too long, about the shadow names passed through whispered conversations, about the people like Kyle, who moved through the system with badges but no accountability. And it was about a boy who had the courage to stay standing, even when someone tried to take his legs away. The unseen names were coming into the light, and the reckoning was only beginning. Victor Hale never entered a room unless he knew two things before the door opened: who had touched the doorknob last, and what they had for breakfast. Control wasn't about noise. It was about silence and observation, about what people forgot to lock down. And today, there were cracks everywhere. He stood inside a nondescript office above Terminal 3, staring at the digital wall. 6 monitors spread before him, each showing a different feed. On one, a looping security clip showed Kyle Denver's last unauthorized access to the crew lounge. Another displayed live news coverage outside the terminal. Reporters were already assembling. Microphones were being tested. Camera crews positioned. On the fourth screen, Tobias Miles' face appeared in an archived personnel file. Former Tier 6 clearance, Oversight Division. The kind of man no agency admits exists until someone like Victor forces them to. Victor's expression didn't change, but he leaned closer to the screen, zooming in on a timestamp buried in the file's metadata. So he hadn't just resurfaced. He had been watching all along. Behind him, a soft tone signaled an encrypted incoming call. He answered with a single gesture. "They found the tablet," the voice said. "You left Kyle exposed." "No," Victor replied, his tone flat. "Kyle exposed himself. That was part of the test." "You think Miles will stay quiet? I'm counting on him not to." There was a pause. Then the voice asked, "What now?" Victor turned his attention to the fifth screen, now displaying a secure channel chat log between regional crew leaders. "Activate the fallback," he said. "We've got 24 hours before this becomes a policy case. After that, it turns into a purge. You want another incident?" Victor smiled for the first time that day. "I want a distraction." Meanwhile, inside the East Bridge Airport Medical Suite, Zion Miles sat in a chair by the window, his leg elevated and iced. A cup of lukewarm orange juice sat untouched on the table beside him. He was watching a news segment on a muted TV across the room. There was a photo of the broken crutches on screen. A wide-angle shot of the jet bridge. Empty, except for a gloved ground handler holding one bent support stick in both hands like it had come from a crime scene. Zion turned away from the screen. His reflection stared back at him in the window. Not just his face, but what he represented now. "I didn't want this," he said aloud. Tobias, sitting nearby, looked up from his tablet. "I know. I didn't want people seeing me like that." "You mean vulnerable?" Zion nodded, slow and small. Tobias set the device down and leaned forward, elbows on knees. Being seen is never weakness, but sometimes it feels like being unarmed. Zion didn't reply. His thoughts were racing too fast. Images of Kyle's face when he grabbed the crutches, the thud of metal hitting the floor, the stairs, the silence, the way no one had rushed forward right away. Only his father. Everyone else had watched, uncertain if helping him was worth the risk of standing out. "I'm just a kid," Zion whispered. "Why would they come after me?" "They didn't come after you," Tobias said. "They came after me. You were just in the path." Zion looked down at his knee. "Well, it worked." Tobias sat beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, Z, it didn't. Because you're still here. You're still speaking. That's what they hate most." There was a quiet knock at the door. It opened to reveal Cheryl Maddox, CEO of Crestline Airlines. She wore a navy suit that made her look taller than she was. Her presence filled the room before she even spoke. "I wanted to see both of you before the formal review begins," she said. "May I sit?" Tobias nodded. Zion didn't look at her. Cheryl sat on the edge of the visitor chair, hands clasped, eyes steady. "What happened to you," she said gently to Zion, "was inexcusable. Not just unethical, unlawful. I can't take away what you experienced. But I want you to know there will be consequences." Zion still didn't speak, but his fingers twitched on the armrest. Cheryl turned to Tobias. "There's something else." Internal records were scrubbed. Kyle's clearance level was adjusted manually last week. Someone inside bypassed the usual flight crew vetting. That's how he ended up on that route. Tobias closed his eyes. "Victor," he muttered. Cheryl blinked. "I'm sorry." Tobias opened his eyes again. "Victor Hale. He's embedded at a systems level. I've tracked 3 internal deviations from his influence in the last quarter. Each time, it ended in a protocol conflict. Always against people like Zion. Quiet removals, policy errors, no accountability." Cheryl nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "We're running full background sweeps now," she said. "Legal's involved. Federal oversight will escalate this beyond PR." "But Tobias," he looked at her, "I need to know, is your family safe?" Tobias hesitated. "We are, for now." A few hours later, in a restricted wing of the airport, Kyle Denver sat alone in an interview room with one camera mounted in the corner. He stared at his own reflection in the glass, wondering if this was the moment his life ended or transformed. The door opened. Elliot Rhodes stepped in, followed by a legal representative from the Department of Transportation. Kyle straightened. "You're here to intimidate me." Elliot didn't flinch. He pulled out a chair and sat. "No, I'm here to understand why a man with no criminal record, average clearance, and an otherwise clean performance log would sabotage his entire career to provoke a child." Kyle opened his mouth, closed it, then muttered, "You wouldn't understand. Try me." Kyle leaned forward, eyes hard. "You people. You think you're the only ones allowed to enforce the rules, to define what justice looks like, but people like me who play by the rules, who do the dirty work, were always dispensable to you." Elliot's voice was quiet. "So you found a new system, one that made you feel indispensable." Kyle didn't respond. Elliot nodded. "Victor Hale promised you power, but he only gave you permission, and now you'll pay the cost." Outside the room, a silent alarm blinked on the security console. Another clearance breach was registered, this time in Terminal 2 near the long-term staff elevators. Victor Hale's distraction had been activated, but for the first time, someone was watching his every move. And this time, he had made the mistake of targeting a father who had given everything to vanish from the system only to rise again when his son was harmed. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal. The press conference was not Tobias's idea. He hated the idea of spectacle, of headlines that reduced human experience into sound bites. But Cheryl Maddox insisted. The world was already talking. Half-truths and speculation were spreading faster than the facts, and Zion's name had already leaked. If they didn't shape the story now, someone else would. So they stood together behind a long wooden table in a quiet media room inside the Eastbridge Airport Security Annex. The lighting was soft but clinical. Reporters sat in rows, murmuring, eyes flicking between devices and camera crews. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Zion sat between his father and Cheryl. His left knee was braced and elevated slightly. His crutches leaned against the table leg beside him. His gaze was steady, though his fingers drummed nervously against his pant leg. The microphones were hot, the cameras live, the feed broadcast nationwide. Cheryl opened first. "Good afternoon. I'm Cheryl Maddox, CEO of Crestline Airlines. What occurred aboard Flight 627 3 days ago is not just unacceptable, it is unconscionable." She paused. A young passenger with a disability was physically harmed. A federal agent was undermined. And a system meant to serve all passengers equally failed in one of the most public ways possible. Flashes from cameras dotted the room. "We are not here today to manage image. We are here to take responsibility, and more importantly, to listen." She looked toward Zion. He nodded once, then leaned slightly forward. "My name is Zion Miles," he began. "I'm 13 years old. I like history, video games, and spicy ramen. I also have a physical disability. I walk with crutches because of a spinal injury I got when I was little." The room was silent except for the quiet click of keys and camera shutters. I didn't want to be on TV. I didn't want people looking at me this way. But I want to tell the truth. He inhaled. "When I boarded that plane, I didn't expect anything to happen. I was just tired. I just wanted to get to my seat. But a man in a uniform decided I didn't belong. He said I couldn't take my crutches. He said I was a safety risk. He didn't ask. He didn't listen. He just grabbed them." Zion's voice cracked just slightly. Tobias reached under the table and squeezed his hand. "When I hit the ground, I didn't feel the pain at first. I felt the shame. I felt everyone looking at me like I was the problem, like I had done something wrong." He looked up at the room, at all the grown-ups with their ties and tablets and questions. "I'm not the problem. And other kids like me aren't either. We're just people. We deserve seats. We deserve safety. We deserve to be seen." A single clap echoed from the back row before a moderator quickly silenced it. Tobias leaned forward. "I'm Dr. Tobias Miles. I am a former federal oversight officer for transportation integrity, and I want to say something that I was trained never to say in front of cameras." He looked straight into the lens. "The system is compromised." The air changed instantly. A hum of tension rolled through the reporters like wind through dry grass. "There are individuals, well-connected and well-funded, working within our travel infrastructure to manipulate policy, undermine accountability, and quietly erase the most vulnerable passengers from view. What happened to my son was not isolated. It was strategic, calculated, executed under the guise of procedure." Cheryl sat still, eyes trained on the floor. She had read the files. She knew Tobias wasn't exaggerating. "I left that world for a reason," Tobias continued. "I disappeared to protect my family, but when my son was dragged into it, when a child was used as bait, I returned. He placed a hand on Zion's shoulder. "And I will not leave again until every person responsible is brought into the light." Questions exploded from the floor. Microphones were raised. Hands waved. But Tobias didn't respond. He stood, helped Zion gently to his feet, and exited through the side door with Cheryl and 2 federal agents following. Outside, the sun was low in the sky. Gold light stretched across the terminal's reflective windows. Inside a dark apartment several miles away, Victor Hale watched the press conference replay on a muted television. Zion's face appeared again, this time not blurred. Victor didn't move. He simply lit a cigarette and stared. His fallback distraction at Terminal 2 had failed. The planted device was found and deactivated by airport intelligence within 90 minutes. The fake crew assignment had been flagged by an observant scheduler. He was slipping. Not because his plan was weak, but because he had underestimated the one thing he never should have: public emotion. He flicked ash into a tray and leaned back. "They want a war," he muttered. "Let's see if they survive one." At that same moment, Elliot Rhodes sat in a small, private conference room on the east wing of the airport. He was reviewing transcripts of past flight conflicts marked as non-actionable. Several now shared common markers: unknown crew members with scrubbed credentials, inconsistencies in manifest timestamps, and in 3 cases, victims under the age of 15. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. And Elliot was no longer just observing. He was preparing a formal handoff to a federal panel for covert investigation. The exposure of Kyle Denver was just the surface. Victor's web was larger than any of them expected. Back in their hotel room, Zion lay on the bed, eyes scanning the ceiling again. The brace itched slightly, but he didn't say anything. Tobias was at the small desk, typing notes on his laptop. "Dad," Zion said. "Yes." "Are we safe now?" Tobias looked over, then closed the laptop softly. "Safer than we were." Zion nodded. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" Tobias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. "I think we'll always be watched," he said. "But we won't be alone." Zion rolled onto his side. "I didn't think my voice mattered." Tobias smiled, tired but proud. "It changed everything." Zion didn't speak again. He simply closed his eyes and let sleep pull him under. And somewhere in the distance, a message was being transmitted, not through an encrypted channel or a silent courier, but through every screen where a young black boy had just told the truth. When silence breaks, it echoes. And this time, the world had heard. Tobias didn't sleep that night. The hotel curtains were drawn tight, the room dim except for the pale glow of his laptop screen. Zion breathed steadily in the second bed, finally resting after 2 sleepless nights. The boy's body was still healing, but it was his mind Tobias worried about now. Fame wasn't a blessing. Not like this. Not when it was built from humiliation. The cursor blinked on a classified interface Tobias hadn't accessed in over 7 years. The password had changed, but the encryption key on his old drive still worked. He pulled up the private records archive of the Interagency Transportation Security Review Task Force, the same one he helped design in the aftermath of the Hudson Terminal infiltration. Victor Hale's name was still redacted, but the pattern was there. Nearly 30 conflict incidents over the past 18 months, most involving crew-level breaches, altered logs, or unexplained policy overrides. 17 involved children, 9 had disabilities, 5 ended in physical harm. The algorithm didn't lie. He copied the dataset and encrypted it into a secure drive, then sat back, eyes burning from fatigue. For a brief second, he looked at Zion's backpack resting near the table. It still had stickers on it. Superman, a faded sticker from a history museum, and a red crutch silhouette Zion had made himself. His son was not a symbol. He was a kid, and this world was going to have to learn how to treat him that way. At exactly 5:47 of BAM, Tobias's phone vibrated. The screen lit up with a name that made his spine straighten. Elliot Rhodes. He answered immediately. Something's happened. Elliot said, "Turn on the news." Tobias flicked on the television. The early morning news ticker was already rolling. Breaking second airline incident emerges involving disabled teen flight, 904 grounds. Midair after alleged threatening passenger report proven false. A shaky cell phone video filled the screen. A boy, maybe 14, black. Slim, wearing noise-canceling headphones, was being forcibly removed from a first-class seat. His mother screamed as two men dragged him by his arms toward the back of the plane. The voiceover confirmed what Tobias already feared. The boy had autism. His seat had been properly booked. No threat had been made. The crew had used the passenger disturbance code as justification for a forced downgrade. Zion woke up, blinking into the light. He sat up and stared at the TV. "That's happening again?" he asked. Tobias nodded. "This isn't about us anymore," Zion said quietly. "They're trying to start something. At the airport." Elliot met Tobias in a restricted access hallway beneath the East Bridge tarmac. The room they entered was small, low-lit, and lined with soundproofing. Elliot had set up a digital whiteboard showing Victor's known proxies and previous transport targets. Flight 904 was crewed by two unregistered reserves. Elliot said, "We think Victor had them swapped last minute. He's testing what happens when we're distracted." Tobias leaned over the table. "He's baiting a national response and creating legal chaos in the process." Elliot added, "Two incidents within 72 hours, both involving black children with disabilities. If the media frenzy doesn't implode the airline industry, the lawsuits will." Tobias stared at the board. "He's not after the airlines," he said. "He's after the regulatory vacuum that comes next. If public confidence collapses, federal oversight freezes, reorganization begins, that's where he inserts his people." Elliot shook his head slowly. "That's the line. He's crossed it." Tobias turned away, rubbing his jaw. "Then it's time we stop reacting." Back in their hotel room, Zion was sitting at the desk, typing something on his laptop. He had avoided social media for most of the day, but now he was writing a blog post. Not for the public, for himself. A place to put the pieces of what he was feeling. The post was titled, "The Seat Was Mine." He wrote slowly. "I didn't ask to be a symbol. I just wanted to sit down. But when they looked at me, they didn't see a kid. They saw a question they didn't want to answer. So they took the easy way. And now the world is watching." He paused. "I'm scared of being seen for the wrong reasons, but I'm more scared of being silent when others are going through the same thing." Tobias returned a few minutes later. Zion looked up. "Can I talk tomorrow?" he asked. "Like, to other kids, maybe at the hospital or a school." Tobias blinked. "You want to speak again?" Zion nodded. "I don't want anyone thinking they're the only one. I thought I was." Tobias placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're already changing lives." That evening, Victor Hale stood in a corner booth at a private bar in a district that didn't officially exist on East Bridge zoning maps. His contacts were already waiting, 3 men in tailored suits and 1 woman in a tan coat who never gave her name. Victor placed a flash drive on the table. "Phase 2 is accelerating," he said. Public sympathy is peaking. All we need is one federal misstep to flip sentiment. One of the men frowned. You're playing with fire. I'm controlling the flame, Victor replied. You think Tobias Miles won't respond? Victor smiled faintly. He already has, and that's what makes him useful. He looked out the tinted window. Dusk was falling. We'll bleed the system dry, and when it resets, we'll build it in our image. That night, Zion's blog post went live. It wasn't promoted. It wasn't stylized. Just plain text. But within 6 hours, it had been shared over 400,000 times. By morning, advocacy groups were quoting it, educators were reading it aloud in classrooms, and journalists were calling it the most honest reflection of ableism and transportation they had seen in a decade. Zion wasn't just a voice. He was a mirror, and the world, for once, was listening. From the 32nd floor of Crestline Tower, the city looked peaceful. Cars blinked below, like distant fireflies. Airplanes took off in the distance, tiny silver arrows slicing through dawn-colored sky. But inside the boardroom, peace had no place. Cheryl Maddox stood at the head of a polished oak table, her sleeves rolled up, her voice tight with purpose. Beside her, Tobias Miles paced slowly, eyes scanning through the latest security reports. The digital display showed a mosaic of recent disturbances in major airports across the country. Not full-on disasters, just enough to rattle public trust. Gate mix-ups, passenger reassignments, crew malfunctions. In every case, someone had slipped through checks. This isn't disorganization, Tobias said. It's design. Victor is laying breadcrumbs. Incidents staged just far enough apart that they look like coincidence. Elliot Rhodes leaned forward from his seat at the far end. He's trying to exhaust the system. If every airport is firefighting, no one's looking for the arsonist. Cheryl nodded grimly. I've authorized a temporary halt on all staff promotions and reassignments until we trace every credential. We're also compiling witness reports from passengers who flagged unusual crew behavior in the last year. Tobias stopped pacing. That's not enough. We need a signal, something visible, a message to every agency, every carrier, every regulator. If we don't draw a line now, the next escalation will be irreversible. Cheryl hesitated. What do you propose? Tobias looked straight at her. We go public with the Victor files. Elliot blinked. That's classified data. If we expose that, you're risking your security clearance. I lost my clearance the day I carried Zion off that plane. Tobias said, I don't care about protection anymore. I care about truth. The room fell silent. Cheryl crossed her arms. You're sure you're ready for that? Tobias didn't blink. Victor wants fear. We'll give him fury. Back at the hotel, Zion sat by the window, legs curled under him, watching the city stretch into daylight. His phone buzzed softly beside him. Messages kept coming in, some from kids, some from parents. A girl named Lila had sent a voice note. I saw what happened to you. My brother has cerebral palsy. They made us wait an hour once while they searched for a secure seat. I didn't even know we were allowed to be mad. Zion played the message twice. Then he opened his notes app and began writing again. This time, not just for himself. When Tobias returned late that afternoon, he found Zion still in the same place, surrounded by paper and notes. What's all this? Tobias asked. Zion looked up. I think I want to write something for schools, like a talk, but for kids, about what to do when you feel like the world sees through you. Tobias smiled gently. Sounds like a revolution. Zion shrugged. Maybe just a start. At the same moment, in a tower 2 blocks away, Victor Hale stood in a private server room filled with machines humming like distant thunder. He tapped a command into a console, then watched as encrypted files transferred to a secure satellite uplink. Beside him, a younger man, Slim, sharp-suited, watched with concern. "You really think they'll go public?" Victor didn't answer right away. He checked the upload progress, 92%. "I think Tobias always does what's right. That's why he's dangerous. And if he outs you," Victor looked over, calm as stone. "I'm a rumor. You can't arrest a rumor, but you can weaponize it." He turned back to the console, eyes glinting with something colder than anger. "They want to expose the system. Fine. Let's show them what the system really looks like when it breaks." That evening, Cheryl held a press briefing. Unlike the previous one, this wasn't about apology. It was about warning. She stood at the podium, framed by a federal backdrop and flanked by security officials. "There is a coordinated campaign targeting the stability of national air travel," she said. "This is not speculation. We have verified manipulation of clearance systems, fabricated crew credentials, and staged incidents designed to provoke public outrage." Reporters erupted in questions. Cheryl raised her hand. "One of the masterminds behind this campaign is an individual known as Victor Hale. He is not affiliated with any agency, company, or department. He is operating without oversight, and he has infiltrated multiple systems." She paused. "Today, we are releasing a portion of the Victor files to independent watchdog organizations and civil rights groups. We believe public accountability is now our strongest defense." Within hours, the files spread like wildfire. News anchors used phrases like deep sabotage, transportation insurgency, and disability profiling. Social media exploded with demands for systemic reform. Zion's blog traffic doubled, then tripled. Tobias stood by the hotel window that night, watching the city lights flicker. Behind him, Zion sat on the bed, scrolling through messages. "Do you regret it?" Zion asked. Tobias turned. "Regret what?" "Coming back. Being seen again." Tobias walked over and sat down beside him. "I regret that it took your pain to wake me up." Zion didn't respond. "You're not just my reason," Tobias said. "You're my reminder." Zion looked up, eyes searching, of what Tobias smiled. "That truth is louder than fear. If we let it be." Across the country, airport security personnel began overnight audits. Staff IDs were re-verified, boarding procedures were reviewed, disability training modules were reinstated. What had begun as one child's humiliation had now reshaped an entire industry's conscience. But in one corner of a silent control room, a screen blinked quietly. An alert. Unauthorized credential access level 5 override detected. Victor had made his next move. And this time, it wasn't sabotage. It was infiltration. It began with a missing gate agent. At Terminal C of Crestline's regional hub in Denver, a boarding crew waited for flight instructions that never came. The gate was locked. The manifest had been approved, but the lead agent's ID badge failed to register in the system. By the time IT cleared the flag, she was gone. An hour later, a secondary alert was triggered in Tampa, then another in Seattle. All had one thing in common. Each flag staffer had cleared security just days earlier. Each had a perfect digital record, and none of them existed before 3 months ago. The Victor protocol had activated. At Crestline Tower, Cheryl sat frozen as the reports came in. She watched them flash one after another on the screen in her private office. Tobias stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw set. "They're inside," he said. Elliot entered with a file under his arm. "They've already moved," he said. We just got confirmation from the Department of Transportation. 2 internal databases were accessed. One of them was medical clearance. Tobias turned slowly. Medical clearance for what passengers who require mobility assistance? Elliot said. The kind of data Zion's incident would have triggered. The implication hung in the air. They're targeting vulnerability, Tobias said. Not just to create chaos, to take control of how assistance is administered. Who qualifies? Who doesn't? Cheryl looked pale. If they control the definition of need, she whispered, they can rewrite who deserves access. Elliot laid out the files. This goes deeper. We traced one of the flagged agents in Denver. Her clearance was signed off by someone in the Office of Flight Safety, except that person resigned last year. We checked the signature log. It was forged. Tobias didn't blink. They've taken over credentialing, which means we no longer know who's staffing our planes. Zion, meanwhile, was sitting in a quiet room at the Eastbridge Hospital Children's Wing. The hospital had invited him to speak not for publicity, but because patients had asked to meet him. There were 10 kids in the room, a few in wheelchairs, one with a walker, most younger than him. He wore jeans and a button-up shirt, sleeves rolled just above his wrists. His hands shook at first, but he steadied them. I didn't come here to be brave, Zion said. I came here because I know what it's like to be looked at, like you don't belong, like the space you're taking up is too big, or too slow, or too much trouble. A boy in the front row nodded quietly. I thought maybe something was wrong with me, Zion continued, but it wasn't me. It was the way people saw me. He paused, until I made them look again. The room stayed silent, not uncomfortable, just present. The kind of quiet that listens. Afterward, one of the hospital volunteers walked Zion back to the lobby. As they neared the exit, a nurse caught up to them. You made them feel powerful, she said softly. Some of them haven't felt that in a long time. Zion smiled, tired but grateful. Maybe if we all say something, he said. The world has to listen longer. Back at Crestline Tower, the full scope of Victor's infiltration was beginning to materialize. Elliot compiled a list of compromised systems. Tobias cross-referenced timestamps with previous incident reports. What they uncovered was chilling. There had been 7 staged removals of disabled passengers in the past 90 days. All involved newly cleared crew. All used nearly identical justification codes: behavioral threat, safety risk, or passenger relocation due to aircraft balance. Tobias ran the codes through a behavioral matrix. Patterns emerged. Each removal occurred within minutes of boarding. Each victim was alone or accompanied by a single guardian. Each was denied recourse. It's a playbook, Tobias muttered. He's training them. This isn't sabotage, it's recruitment. Cheryl leaned forward. Then we need to talk to someone who knows his patterns better than anyone. Tobias didn't hesitate. We find Kyle Denver. Kyle had vanished after his suspension. Initial investigators assumed he'd fled, but Elliot traced an old payment trail linked to a shell consulting firm Victor once used, one that funneled stipends to contracted de-escalation specialists. He's not hiding, Elliot said. He's embedded. They located Kyle in a rental cabin 2 hours outside the city. Tobias and Elliot drove up late in the evening. The air was sharp with pine and dry leaves. The cabin was small, sloped roof, one flickering porch light. Kyle opened the door before they knocked. He looked thinner, not scared, just hollowed out. He let them in without speaking. Inside, the walls were bare. A few scattered notebooks, a single folding chair. I know why you're here, Kyle said finally. I've been waiting. Tobias studied him. You know what Victor's planning? You've seen it. Kyle nodded slowly. He told us it was about order, about cleaning up the inefficiency, making travel safer. At first, it made sense. Most of us thought we were just streamlining procedures. And then Elliot asked. Then the rules changed. He started talking about passenger profiles, about who was distracting from the mission of modern transit. Kyle's voice caught. I didn't know what I was part of. Until Zion. The room fell still. I broke something that day. Kyle said quietly. In him, in me. Tobias didn't flinch. Help us fix it. Kyle nodded once. I'll testify. I'll turn over every name, every location. But you have to promise me something. What Kyle looked at him, eyes sharper now. Don't just stop Victor. Dismantle what made him possible. Tobias rose slowly. We intend to. That night, Victor received a single alert on his satellite terminal. Known associate flagged Kyle Denver. Status compromised. Victor stared at the screen, emotionless. He shut the alert and opened a secondary feed. It showed a digital map of gate clearances across the country. A red dot blinked slowly over the East Bridge Hospital flight wing. It was time. If Tobias and Zion thought they had seen war, Victor was ready to show them what silence could do when it finally screamed. The morning of Zion's flight to Washington, D.C. began in quiet preparation. The sky outside the East Bridge terminal shimmered with the soft light of sunrise. Everything felt routine. Too routine. Zion double-checked his backpack, sliding a small speech notebook into the front pocket. He had written it late the night before, just in case he got nervous and forgot his words. He didn't realize the gate crew had changed overnight. He didn't know that the person wheeling him toward boarding wasn't the one originally assigned. And he had no idea the boarding pass had been reprinted. Tobias had planned to accompany Zion. But just before they left for the airport, Cheryl called. There's movement on Victor's terminal relay. She said, We've got activity near a network hub in Houston. I need you here now. It could be the source of the override protocols. Tobias hesitated. Zion's wheel's up in 90 minutes. I'll have Elliot meet him. We need you on this. If Victor is jumping systems, it has to be now. Tobias kissed Zion's forehead and promised to meet him after landing. Zion didn't question it. He trusted his dad the way you trust air to be there when you breathe. At the airport. Gate B-19 was unusually quiet. A new crew member, badge-reading Morrison, greeted Zion with a tight smile. We'll get you pre-boarded right away, she said. She pushed his wheelchair smoothly through the jet bridge, but took a sharp turn at the connector. This isn't the plane, Zion said. It's a new configuration, she replied. Smaller lift dial, faster boarding. He frowned. His stomach tightened. Meanwhile, Elliot Rhodes was stuck in traffic 2 terminals away. His clearance badge wasn't scanning at the usual checkpoint. A systems freeze, manufactured or real. He didn't know, but the delay cost him 12 minutes. When he finally reached the main gate, Zion was already gone. The plane was taxiing, except it wasn't the flight they'd booked. It wasn't even headed to Washington. Inside Crestline Tower, Cheryl and Tobias stared at the real-time trace. Flight 422 has been diverted, the text said. Filed under standard route adjustment, but it's going west, not east. Tobias stepped forward. Who authorized the route? The screen blinked. Authorization. Internal override. Clearance level. Read Cheryl's breath caught. Red level? That's buried inside federal systems. We don't even use that tier anymore. Tobias's voice was steel. Victor does. He grabbed his phone. "Calling Elliot. Is he on that plane?" Elliot's voice was tight. "Yes." Tobias didn't wait. He turned toward the exit, jaw clenched. "We're intercepting!" Onboard Flight 421. Zion noticed something strange. No other wheelchair passengers. No flight announcements. No crew introductions. The lights were dimmed, and the cabin doors locked 5 minutes after boarding, even though passengers were still trickling in. He sat upright in his first-class seat, heart thumping. This didn't feel like before. It felt worse. The woman who wheeled him in was gone, replaced by 2 uniformed men who wore no name tags. Across the aisle, a man in a gray suit kept looking at him. When Zion met his eyes, the man smiled, but it wasn't kind. He reached for his phone to text Tobias. No signal. At Crestline Control. The override was collapsing. Elliot slammed his fist on the table. The aircraft transponder was cloaked. "We've got no altitude, no trajectory, only cabin registry." Tobias stared at the digital mock-up. Victor wasn't just moving people anymore. He was moving pieces. "If that plane disappears from airspace," he said, "the industry follows." Cheryl turned toward her assistant. "Alert National Transport Security. Immediate air reroute. I want that plane visual within 60 seconds. At 38,000 feet. Victor's voice came through the cabin intercom. Not from the cockpit, from the service speakers. "Good morning, passengers," or should I say participants. Zion's blood went cold. "There's no need for alarm," Victor said. "You are merely part of a demonstration. One that will, I assure you, reshape how your country views freedom of movement." Zion looked around. Several passengers were frozen. A few reached for call buttons. Nothing worked. Victor continued, "Some of you may know of a young man on board, a child whose silence spoke louder than most microphones. He is not our target. He is our message." Zion stood up slowly. The man in the gray suit rose too. Zion's mind raced. He remembered what Tobias had told him once. "If they look at you like you're small, remind them that you are centered." His voice cracked, but it came out clear. "Why are you doing this?" The man didn't answer, but Victor did, still over the speaker. "Because systems only change when they collapse. And today, we collapse one." Zion moved into the aisle. Behind him, a passenger rose, trying to record on a phone. It was snatched away. Zion took a deep breath. "If you want to collapse something," he said, voice trembling but strong, "start with your mirror. On the ground." Tobias coordinated a scramble. "We've got partial signal," a technician shouted. "They've dropped to 25,000 feet. If we intercept in the next 5 minutes, we can vector them toward our controlled strip." A security escort was dispatched. Fighter jets rerouted to visual lock. Inside the aircraft, Zion felt the tilt as the plane shifted. Then, a second voice came through the cabin. "This one real. The pilot. This is your captain speaking. We've regained partial control. Everyone remains seated." The man in the gray suit cursed under his breath and reached for Zion. But Zion was faster. He grabbed his crutch from the floor and swung. It cracked the man's knee. He howled, falling sideways. Zion backed away, crutch in hand like a shield. By the time Tobias reached the strip where the plane emergency landed, the sun was casting long shadows across the tarmac. He ran toward the exit ramp. The doors opened. Zion appeared at the top of the stairs, whole, shaken, but standing. Tobias reached him in seconds, pulling him into a full-body hug. "I knew you'd find me," Zion whispered. Tobias held him tighter. Always. The press conference happened 48 hours after the interception. Cameras from every major network crowded the room. Reporters whispered as Cheryl Maddox stepped to the podium, flanked by federal security and aviation regulators. Behind her, a projection displayed a simple phrase in bold white text: "Reclaiming the skies, a national reckoning." Cheryl's voice was steady, but there was something different in her eyes. Not just authority, resolve. 2 days ago, a commercial flight was overtaken using internal override protocols long believed dormant. The goal was not terrorism in the traditional sense. It was ideological, tactical. It was a demonstration. She paused. We now have confirmation that Victor Hale, the orchestrator of this campaign, had spent years infiltrating credentialing systems. He created ghost identities, manipulated clearance databases, and reprogrammed access points in aircraft routing software. Gasps echoed across the room. Thanks to the swift response of our reinstated watchdog task force and to the cooperation of whistleblower Kyle Denver, we were able to intervene before a tragedy unfolded. But let us be clear, this was not a lucky save. This was a close call. One we will never allow again. Cheryl turned her head slightly toward the second row, where Tobias Miles sat, his son Zion at his side. We owe our deepest gratitude to Dr. Tobias Miles and his son Zion Miles, whose bravery in the face of direct threat not only prevented a catastrophe, but reminded the world that silence is not the absence of strength. It is sometimes the beginning of a storm. The room burst into applause. Zion looked down, a little embarrassed, but he squeezed his father's hand. Later that evening, Tobias and Zion stood on the roof of their hotel. The sun was low, turning the city skyline gold. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Zion broke the quiet. I didn't know what to say when I stood up on that plane, he said. I was scared. That's how you know you're alive, Tobias said softly, and how you know the words matter. Zion turned toward him. Do you think people will actually change things? Like for real, Tobias nodded slowly. I think change is made up of 1,000,000 hard decisions. You made one. The next morning, Cheryl, Elliot, and Tobias presented their full report to the Department of Transportation. A complete overhaul of clearance protocols was enacted. Victor Hale was officially listed as a cyber threat under the national security umbrella. Several airline executives resigned, but the most meaningful change came weeks later. At the Capitol, Zion Miles was invited to speak before a special commission on transportation equity and disability inclusion. He walked up to the podium with quiet grace. This time, he didn't need notes. My name is Zion Miles. I'm 13 years old. I use crutches because I have a neurological condition. It's just a part of me, like my voice, or my skin, or the way I remember song lyrics without trying. He looked out at the room. On one flight, someone decided my presence made them uncomfortable. They threw my crutches off the plane, but what they didn't know was who they were flying with. He paused. They were flying with a father who had spent his whole life fighting in silence, with a community that knows what it feels like to be overlooked, and with a boy who didn't ask to be strong. He just asked to be treated like he belonged. People in the audience nodded, a few wiping tears. People say I'm brave. I think I'm just tired. Tired of pretending that being quiet means being okay. Tired of wondering if every boarding process is a test. I didn't stand up on that plane to be a hero. I stood up because I knew if I didn't, someone else might never get the chance. He glanced at Tobias, sitting in the front row. I want to live in a country where accessibility isn't a favor, where being different doesn't mean being dangerous. and where no child has to choose between their dignity and their destination. Applause erupted, cameras flashed, and for the first time in the entire hearing, no one interrupted. That night, Victor Hale was captured in a remote European city under a federal warrant. He offered no resistance, no explanation, only a single phrase as they escorted him into custody. Systems are built to forget, but the world didn't forget Zion Miles. A national scholarship fund was named in his honor. A set of new airline passenger rights laws were signed into action, and at Eastbridge International, a mural was commissioned in the main terminal. It showed a boy standing on the wing of a plane, holding a crutch in one hand and a microphone in the other. Tobias took Zion to see it when it was unveiled. Neither of them spoke at first. Then Zion asked, "Do you think it's too much?" Tobias smiled. "No," he said. "I think it's just enough." On the way out, Zion turned back one more time, eyes scanning the image. The boy in the mural didn't look afraid. He looked ready. As they walked to their car, Tobias put an arm around his son's shoulders. "So," he said, "what's next?" Zion grinned. "We keep flying, but this time we decide where." The wind picked up gently. Planes lifted into the evening air, and for the first time in a long while, the sky didn't feel like a ceiling. It felt like a door they had opened together. What began as a flight turned into a fight for humanity. Zion Miles didn't ask to be strong. He didn't ask to be a symbol. He simply wanted to board a plane, like any other child. But when injustice tried to write his story in silence, he rewrote it in courage. This isn't just about a cruel flight attendant. It's about a system that believes certain bodies were less deserving of respect. A system that failed to see the quiet brilliance in a child, and the storm of justice in a father's calm resolve. Let Zion's voice echo in your heart. Let his crutch, thrown in cruelty, rise as a banner for every child who's been overlooked. Because every time we say nothing, we give silence power. But when we speak, stand, and resist, we change everything. If this story touched you, if it made you feel seen, if it stirred your sense of justice, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your voice helps these stories reach the people who need them most. We have more stories coming of truth, healing, and the quiet heroes among us. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never look away.